So welcome guys, and look at it, we find ourselves once again standing at the bottom of the steps of a beautiful aeroplane that we're about to go fly. In this case, we're going to take this DHL A300-600F, that's the freighter version, and we'll take it from Manchester here across to Dublin in Ireland, which is just a short flight. So quick look at the geography of it then. Here is Manchester in the north of England, just next to Liverpool, and we'll actually pass overhead Liverpool on the way out. You'll see it off to the right hand side of the aeroplane. Quite busy bit of airspace in real life this, because Manchester is, I think, the second busiest airport in the UK. It has 2 runways, which is also quite unusual in the UK, I think, and I could be wrong. There's only Heathrow that has 2 runways apart from here. So we'll launch off out of Manchester. We'll head out. Liverpool will be off to the right hand side of the aircraft towards the Wallasey VOR, which is on the Wirral, which is a little kind of peninsula which kind of sticks out between England and North Wales. You'll see the mountains of Snowdonia off to the left hand side, and then we'll coast out across the Irish Sea. Just a really short flight, really doesn't take very long at all. I mean, in real life, I've done this flight lots of times because my brother's family is from Ireland, so I've gone over there lots of times, and it's really short, maybe just over 20 minutes in the air. It really doesn't take that long. So in real life, of course, this is done by Aer Lingus and Ryanair, and you get the traditional shot down Ryanair arrival if you're in a 737, and I'm not joking. That's every single time I've ever been there to Dublin with Ryanair. It's you definitely know you've arrived. So we're going to do that, and it won't take too long. What we'll do is, it's a first look video, and we want to see whether this aircraft is as well modeled and as detailed and is what we would call study level. So can I follow what they call the FCOM? This is the Flight Crew Operators Manual, the thing published by Airbus. If I follow this step by step, will that allow me to fly the aeroplane? And that's kind of the test, really. It's always the test of an add-on in Flight Sim. If you can follow the FCOM, the manufacturer's user guide, if you like, then it shows whether the aeroplane is modeled accurately or not. And we will see. I've obviously had a bit of training from Eric, the Monarch captain that we heard from a little bit earlier on. I also had a bit of guidance from the inBuilds team, some stuff that I've researched myself, and I have flown the aeroplane a little bit, but this is pretty much the first full flight I've ever done, and you will join me on it. So we won't bother with the walk around. The aeroplane, it all kind of looks pretty good to me. We will trust that our diligent DHL ground engineers have checked everything, because we don't want to waste time looking around the aeroplane. You can see the modeling of the aeroplane is beautiful. And so the only thing that the FCOM says, 2 things we've got to look out for before we get on the aeroplane. One is that the APU area is clear. Now, the APU outlet is this thing at the back here, this little nozzle, and obviously that is where the jet exhaust from the APU will come when we start it up. We don't want anybody maybe on a ladder working on that, because we will give them a chemical face peel to remember if that happens. So we don't want to do that. We want to make sure that that is clear and there's no one working up here. And then the other thing that we need to do is, you will see here there is a door on this side. You can just see, and what that is that is the main gear door, and there is another one over on the other side. That's the starboard side gear door, and obviously that will open. That is kind of hydraulically operated, and it opens up and allows the gear to fold itself up when we retract the gear. Now, the ground engineers can drop these to get inside and fix things, and if they're open and we pressurize the hydraulics, they will close, and we will make salami of a DHL ground engineer, which will get us in a heap of trouble. So we want to make sure that nobody's down here playing around with those, which they're not. And also the same kind of thing as well at the front. You can see that nose gear is up. Funny little story about this, actually, from Eric. Just before we jump in the flight deck, you can see that these 2 doors are, they're not quite level. They're a little bit wonky because they're kind of old. Now, the gear lever in this aeroplane has 3 positions. It has the down, and it has this beautiful texture of these tires on it. I love that. And there's the down position, there's the up position, and you'll see a little notch in the middle and that little notch in the middle is the off position. So it's just like a Boeing. It has up and it has down and it has off, and you have to remember to kind of turn the gear off. Now, they don't call it off in this airplane. They actually call it neutral. And what that allows is the hydraulic pressure, which is holding the gear doors up to stop running, because you don't want it running for the whole flight. And what Eric told me is they had a problem, which is this nose gear door. One of them kept drooping down a little bit, and it would have had a big fuel penalty. They would have burned a lot more fuel with that hanging out in that really fast air once they're up in the cruise. So the way to keep it up, apparently, was just to keep the gear in the up position. That kept the hydraulics pressurized, and that actually kept the two gear doors up and kept them level until they could get it back to base, and then the ground engineers could fix it to actually keep it up. So there you are. Just already we've run into a kind of real life story with something that's in the sim, which is kind of cool. All right, enough talking about down here. The aeroplane looks fine. We got two engines, we got two wings, and let's go fly. We'll just take a moment here just to pause on the stairs. I always love this bit. I don't know about you. I love this bit when you get on an aeroplane, and especially if you board on the steps, because often with a jetway you can't quite see the flight deck because it's cut off by the side of the jet bridge. But I love to have a little peek inside the flight deck and see what's going on. And you can see that iniSimulations have modeled the flight deck quite well. So from this view, if you're just hanging around here at the door, you can really see the detail there, which is nice. A little bit of PBR as well. If you move the camera around, you can just kind of see that glinting around there on the door. And it's a really well modeled aeroplane. I mean, you would imagine this is inBuilds. They're famous for their repaints and the quality of those. And that certainly is backed up by the quality of what I'm seeing here. All of the repaints are really, really good. And actually, while I'm just sitting here for a moment, just on the top of the steps, before we get in the aeroplane, let me just quantify something I said a little bit earlier, which was about X-Plane. In the first video, I said, will this be the aircraft that can really change the game for X-Plane? Will this be the plane that brings us that kind of P3D level quality to X-Plane 11? And a couple of people, I don't know, were a little bit triggered by that and said, but there are lots of amazing airplanes in X-Plane. And, I completely agree. But the point that I was making is that every single big, famous airliner add-on, and I'm just talking about airliners here, because I think, that's what most of the people watching this video will be flying. Every single airliner in P3D has a kind of poor relation in X-Plane. And I'm not going to name names, I'm not going to name brands and products, but we all know exactly what I'm talking about, that if there's a really, really well-modeled aeroplane in P3D, there will be something that's just done not quite as well in X-Plane. And the point that I was making in that video is that, will this be, for the very first time, something from X-Plane that is actually better than what we have in P3D? Because look, X-Plane's a great platform. I mean, look at this, right? We've got traffic. This is Traffic Global from Just Flight. I mean, X-Plane's really nice. I mean, just have a look around the apron. It looks really good. I mean, we've got Traffic Global. Okay, Thomas Cook is still alive in this life, which is kind of, well, I suppose you might see the odd Thomas Cook aeroplane floating around in the world somewhere. Definitely Flybe, which is still alive in the sim. X-Plane is a really good platform. Nice looking clouds, nice looking sky. I've got True Earth, the whole of the UK, photo scenery for Ireland. So, the whole flight will look really nice. This is a really well-modeled Manchester as well. This is the Aerosoft version. And it's a really good platform. For me, it just has lacked aeroplanes that give it the depth so that I can really get my teeth into it the way that I have with P3D. And I think now that might be about to change. So let's find out. All right, let's get in the flight deck and I will stop talking. Now, the first thing you see when you walk in are these nicely modeled seats, and they are nicely modeled. A lot of virtual cabins don't have an awful lot going on. Again, there's not a huge amount of detail in here, but look, you're not going to be sitting here and you don't want to waste, frame rates and performance on modeling all this stuff. But, you can see there's a little bit of dust and dirt there around the edge of the seat. and everything is kind of modeled the way it should. One thing I really love is the floor. Now, look at the floor. It's got that kind of honeycomb, kind of rubber matting thing, like you get in school. This is a freighter, remember. There won't be any carpet in here. This stuff has to be, I guess maybe they hose it clean, maybe when it goes to places where the cargo is dirty or messy, carrying livestock or whatever. So, this stuff needs to be easily able to be cleaned. And this is a really nice bit of attention to detail from iniSimulations that they put this in. All right, let's go inside and I will show you one of the party tricks of this aeroplane. So we have this little net and you can kind of have a little peek through and you'll see by the cargo door over there, a little controller which is used to open the door. And that is all modeled, which is kind of cool. And that cargo controller by the door is actually replicated here in the entryway. So let's have a little play with that now. I press that and it turns on the lights in the cargo compartment behind us, the thing that we just saw through the net. We also have lights here in the entry area, and then this is quite cool, the loaded tarmac light. There's a little light which is kind of below the loading ramp, and it shines a light down onto the ramp, so it illuminates that area of the ramp. So I guess if you're at some incredibly remote airport on a little island in the middle of the night, there's not much lighting, you can switch that on and give the guys loading a little bit of light to see by, which is kind of cool. We can also open and close the door. Now, actually, you've got to close the door yourself in the freighter, remember? There's no cabin crew to do it for you unless you're carrying a courier on one of these seats, but we're not today, so I will get the door closed. So that's one less thing for us to worry about when we get going. We can also open and close the cargo door. So I'll show you this from the cargo section. So this is the A300 freighter's little party trick, which is this cool cargo door, and all this is modeled. So you can open it 70 degrees or 145, and it depends how long you keep your finger on it for. If you just keep your finger on it for a sec, it opens a fraction, and then a bit more and a bit more. If you want it to open all the way, you've got to keep your hand on it like that. Keep your hand on it, and you see it goes all the way to the top, which is kind of cool. And then you get this little kind of roller thing that drops down. And there is a loader as well. If you go into the EFB in the flight deck, you can then actually see the containers being loaded into the fuselage, which is kind of cool. So we're not going to play with all that today because we want to get going. I'm not going to sit around waiting for cargo. We already, as we can see, have some stuff in the back. We're kind of nearly full and we are ready to go. Now I need to find that little flap and get back on the other side, and we'll go into the flight deck. So you see they've modeled all this stuff. The flight deck door is modeled, and also I guess this would be quite important on those long flights, and I love it when they model stuff like this. Of course, you can go off and have a virtual call of nature. So, actually, in fact, you know what, guys? Just, maybe just give me 10 minutes, would you? I'll be back in a bit. Actually, I just realised they didn't model any virtual loo roll, so we'll leave that one there. No one there, that going on. All right, so here we go then into the flight deck, and as you can see, it's a beautifully modelled flight deck. It really is. And do you remember what Eric was saying before, that the flight deck is quite cramped in the A300? It's smaller than an A320, and you really get a sense of that. There's a jump seat here. There's a bunch of circuit breakers at the back. Now, they're not modelled, but they are all physical models, if you see what I mean. So it's not kind of like a kind of flat panel with bitmaps. You can see that every single one of these is kind of modeled individually, which is really nice. And never say never that they might start perhaps putting some of this stuff into the future. Remember, this is the very first aeroplane that any builds have ever made. This is their first attempt at making an aeroplane. They've never done one before, so this is very much version 1, and even some little suggestions that I gave them when they gave me the beta copy. They're really kind of open to suggestions, which is really refreshing to have a developer that's not kind of defensive about their work. They're like, hey, what could we do to make this thing better? I suggested a little life vest sticker. You see a lot of A300s have a little life vest sticker on the back here. That was my suggestion, and they said, okay, we'll do it. This is still a beta copy, so it hasn't made it into that yet, but they did promise me they would work on that, and I will be super happy when we get a little red sticker like that on the back of here saying life vest. That will be down to me. That will be my little claim to fame. So you can see there that the jump seat, and it really doesn't look very comfortable, the jump seat in this thing. You see, it's you sit kind of entirely vertical, and I can't imagine it's a very comfortable place to spend a long time. The rest of the flight deck, though, is really, really nicely modeled. Look at the, for example, the thrust levers. Look at that. Look at the modeling. Really, really beautifully modeled. You can see bits of dust on there. It's really nice. The sunlight's kind of glinting off it. Everything's got PBR. Again, shoot me if you disagree, but I just don't think we've seen, this level of quality in X-Plane. I just don't think we've seen anything of this level. Look at the reflections there in the screens. You can see kind of dirt and flecks of dust on them, like somebody's kind of wiped their hand on it. It's really, really well modeled. Now, call me an A300 fanboy, but I'm pretty impressed by what I've seen so far. Certainly from the modeling viewpoint, this is pretty good. I am finding very little that is not good. Some little marks there on the landing gear lever. It's just beautifully modeled. It really is. Here we go. We're into the yoke now, and again, look at the modeling. Often this stuff is not done very well. These are quite hard to model, these things, because they're kind of round and they're thick and there's a lot of angles and they sometimes get a bit worn. They're often not done very well, but this one's really, really nice. It looks like you could, grab that and fly with it, which is often just not the case with things in the sim. And particularly in X-Plane, a lot of this stuff has just not been done very well. You can see all of the screws, and then, going down here, you've got the fuel controls. Look at the detail there. Look at the detail in the slat and flaps lever. Look at that. It's got that little kind of guard so that you can put it into all the various gates. And again, down here, everything is in really high quality. I'm watching this and doing this recording on a 4K screen, so I can see this in huge detail, and it really, really does stand up. It's fantastically modeled. I'm incredibly impressed with the attention to detail with the modeling. It's very, very good indeed. Let's have a quick look on the overhead just before we move on, because we need to get to Dublin. There is a cold Guinness waiting for us when we get there. Somewhere, if we can find a bar that's open in these strange times. This is the overhead panel, and you'll notice that some of the switches are a bit more worn. The engine start switch there, that ignition switch, looks a bit more worn than others, and then others that don't get used an awful lot, don't have much wear and tear on them at all, which is pretty much what you would expect. Engine fire handles there again, all really well modeled. Really nice. And again, moving across the panel and moving down, beautiful quality and really nice. You can read all the text and pretty much everything works. The on the line kind of product line, if you like, from iniSimulations is essentially about stuff that you would press on the line, a kind of regular line pilot as they fly the aeroplane as it's meant to be flown every single day. And even if you go through the FCOM and maybe there might just be the odd tiny little thing here and there that doesn't quite do what it says in the book, and I've sent that back to inBuilds, and immediately they've said we'll get on this. So I think they take the attitude of, if we can find a way to do it, we will do it. And for me, I think that's a great attitude with the developer. Right, we're going to get this aeroplane to Dublin, and a few things that we want to do if we're going to follow the standard operating procedures, which I am. Now, there are lots and lots of steps in here, including self-tests and other things that just frankly take a lot of time. And I'm not going to do this. I'm just going to do the kind of big ones, the kind of big ticket items, just to show you how well it's modeled. But we'll kind of route through it. Otherwise, we'll be sitting here on the ground in Manchester for about 90 minutes doing all this stuff. So let's just do the biggies. First of all, before we power up the airplane, check that the ignition is in off. We don't want this energizing when we bring some power onto the aircraft. We want to check that the wipers are off so we don't start wiping a dry screen. That will scratch it and we'll be in a world of trouble. Also, we need to make sure the speed brake is not armed. It would be armed if it had the little red thing underneath it, a bit like the A320. It's the same thing. So it's disarmed and it's up. The flaps are up. And also the other thing to check is just that the thrust levers are in the idle position, which they are. And also the gear is down as well. So that's all good. Let's just check the battery voltage, and we can do that with these little rotary switches here. You can see it's got BAT1, BAT2, and BAT3. And you see BAT3 has a load of charge. BAT2 is a little bit less. In fact, BAT2's, it's come down a little bit. So actually, it does say if it's less than, I think, 24, then you can't start the APU from the battery. So that's not really going to be a problem today, because we're going to connect up some external power in a second anyway. So what we'll do first of all is get the batteries on, and then we'll get the external power going. So we know the battery voltages are enough. So let's go 1, let's go 2, let's go 3. And the next thing is, it says ACMR on INV, which is what we want to see, and DCS on BAT, which is also what we want to see according to the FCOM manuals. And you see 777, nothing to do with Boeing, a little self-test for the digital fuel display, and now that's showing us the fuel in the tank. So we've got 4 tons in every tank. That should be more than sufficient for us to get off to Dublin today. And that pretty much, my friends, is it. The batteries are started, and we can continue with the setup. What I will do now is jump into the little EFB, and there's a little bit to talk about here, and I'll come back to some of this, but just for the sake of moving things along, let me just connect up the external power, and a little ground GPU will appear, and you can hear its noisy little diesel engine if you're outside, but you can't hear it inside the flight deck, which is kind of cool. And we can now energize that, and the aeroplane comes to life, and it's a noisy aeroplane. You can really hear those big fans, and these little CRT screens, remember, use a lot of power. They get very warm as well, very hot to the touch. If you remember those old TVs that you would have had back in the 80s, they really are very hot, and they need a lot of cooling, and that's exactly what you can hear now. A really noisy flight deck of the A300. Now, we will go through the panel, and the way that it tells us to do it is to start at the bottom of the panel and work our way to the top, and then similarly with the panel in front of us here, we work from the left and we go across to the right. So normally I would go to the middle if I was the captain, and then the first officer would work from his side from right to left, but obviously I'm here doing everything. So welcome to the world of flight sim, my friends. Right, so we can get the no smoking sign on because we don't want anybody smoking. We have a quick look at the hydraulics. They need to be in the green, and I remember Eric telling me that he thought that our green system in the middle was maybe a little bit lower than he would like, and in fact the blue as well, but he said that this would be fine and absolutely serviceable. If it's in the yellow, then you've got to worry. And of course these aeroplanes were really well known for lots of hydraulic leaks back in the Monarch service, so he said that's definitely something we would keep an eye on. Some fault lights, which you would expect at this point because nothing's really energized. Just spin the camera around. One thing I really do miss in X-Plane is kind of chase plane or easy dock. I'm using X camera, which is very good, but I'm afraid it doesn't work for me as well as easy dock or chase plane, despite the excellent support from the developer. I wonder whether it just has some X-Plane limitations. So let's get the navs on. Now, the navs in this airplane are a bit weird. This is the number 1 nav, this is the number 2, and this is the number 3. And the way that you start them up and get them in nav is that one, whoops, not at nav, and then that one. And then it says BAT Opper, and what that means is it runs a little self-test to see whether it can work on the battery. So if, for example, we're flying to the USA and we lose all the power and they've got to run off the batteries for a while, will they work off the battery? And that's a little self-test there. And now they're in align mode, and we should see the IRSs start to align. Can't really explain to you right now what IRSs do. Go off and Google it. It's a navigation system used in pretty much every airplane, along with GPS, to figure out where the airplane is and where we're going. And when it works out its lat and long, it will appear here and give us our position. Now, at the moment, of course, we can't see anything. PPOS stands for present position. There's nothing going on there. It's got the wind, 300 at 9, which sounds about right. That's pretty close to the ATIS wind that I looked at before the flight. And the PPOS is still blank because obviously we don't have any yet. Little gotcha is that the system here is obviously there are 3 IRSs and they're labeled 1, 2, and 3 on the selector, even though that's 1, that's 2, and that's 3. I'm afraid you would need to ask a man in France circa 1981 why he designed it like that. All right, so let's go back down to the bottom of the panel. Let's get the nav light on. That will give us, of course, the red light on the port wing, which is the left, and the green light on the starboard wing, which is the right. And if you can't remember your port from your starboard, your left and right, the way to remember it is there's no red port left. Obviously, that lovely sweet wine you get from Portugal is called port, and it's red, so you say there ain't no red port left. And that's how you remember it. Now, one thing you will have noticed is that we have absolutely nothing, even though we've got some screens, we've got some eCams, we've got our door page there. We don't have anything here on the autopilot control panel, or the FCU as it's called. And by the way, there is a little controller here to control the brightness of it. I'll turn that up, and I'll also do some more lights as well. So it's not that one, it's that one. And also, let me just move forward a little bit. And there is another one here for the captain's side, and there is another lighting controller. Let me just put the armrest down. There is another one here for this one. So that's the overhead and the panel as well down below us. Right, now, back to this. Nothing in the FCU. It will not do anything until we energize the pitch trim, if you like, computer. This aeroplane has a kind of auto trim. It's really nothing like the one in the A320, but it does have a kind of auto trim system, and the FCU will not do anything until we've turned it on. We need at least one. There are 2 for redundancy. One of them has to be on, and you see the FCU has now come to life. Got 2 yaw dampers, and the ATS is this thing here, which is the auto thrust system. You can, I guess, turn it off and do it all old school, but whether you'll be allowed to or not by your airline, I'm not entirely sure, but you want to turn that on. The galley shed, obviously just saying that we didn't have enough power to run the galley when we first brought the airplane to life. And also, that's about it. We can leave everything else pretty much as it is. We have the wipers are off, the APU we can leave for now. Fuel quantity we kind of looked at before. Oh yeah, one quick thing with the fuel pumps. In the A300, they take a huge electrical load from the electrical system. And it was SOP and Monarch to leave these off until the last minute. So unlike an A320 or a 777 or more modern airplanes where you can turn all this on and just forget about it, in the A300 you turn them off at the end of the flight and then you don't turn them back on until you need them. If we were running the APU, and in fact we can do that now if you want, just to kind of show how it all works. I'm going to turn it on. Because all the fuel pumps are off, you see a little low pressure light that has its own little fuel pump, which is quite clever. Now I can press start, and if we come down here, we should, we see the APU page. And also, because remember, of course, in this aeroplane, they didn't quite trust technology back then, you will see just over there in the distance, a little gauge which is backing that up. It has a little standby APU gauge, which is kind of cool, and you can probably hear the APU roaring into life. And there's the EGT coming up, there's the N1. And then by the time I flick back and look at the overhead, it should probably be saying something like Avail, which, nope, it said XL, and now it's gone to Avail, and that's exactly what you would expect to see. If you're running the APU, by the way, what they generally do is turn on either the inner tank number 2, which is this inner tank here, and in fact, if I just go down real quick and grab the fuel cam, there we are, that one there. And basically there is a little diagram and it kind of explains really what's going on. So now the APU is being fed by this tank here. That was the SOP on the ground. If you had fuel in this tank, if you didn't have fuel in that tank, you would turn on that one. And look, you see the diagrams changed, and now we're sending the fuel from this tank here. That's basically how it used to work. Just send the fuel from somewhere. to pressurize one of the pumps, and that gives the APU a chance to get the fuel from somewhere. But the SOP in this aeroplane with fuel in this tank was to turn on the number 2 in a tank. So there you are. Thank you to Eric for that. So we come up here, we have the APU. Now, there is a little APU fire test, and probably if I was a very good boy, I probably should have run the APU fire test before I did it, but we've left that to one of the DHL engineers. I'm not going to run the fire test while it's running. I don't know for sure whether you can do that while it's running. You might shut the APU down or something. I'm not going to risk it. So we'll do the engine 1 fire test, which says squib, and then press loop test here, and we can test the engine number 1 fire handle, and then let go of that, and we'll continue to get some dings and dongs until I clear that little master caution there. And obviously the ECAM changes depending on the fault that it's trying to show you with the engine fire test. And then obviously the landing gear's down. We can just test the cockpit voice recorder. We get a little thing, it says good there. I don't know whether you can read that. If I just zoom in a little bit, you can probably read it. It says good, and that is in fact all good. Right, back to the bottom then. And the next panel up is our pressurization panel. Now, here's quite a cool little A300 thing. There are basically 2 pressurization systems on this aeroplane, System 1 and System 2, and they're basically identical. And what it does is it flicks between System 1 and 2 every other engine start in the real aeroplane. And it would be pretty cool to see whether iniSimulations have actually simulated that. I imagine it's a fairly simple thing to put in if they haven't. So we will wait and see. When I do a return sector, I will keep a keen eye to see whether it's automatically flicked to the second system. We can leave all this alone. We just want to check that this is 0, this is also 0, and this is 0. Obviously, the difference between outside and in, well, we've been sitting on the ground with the doors open, so we shouldn't have any difference in pressure. The cabin is not climbing or descending, and also the cabin PSI is 0 because we're pretty much on the ground, which is what we would expect. Next we've got the heaters. So we've got the probe heats, captain standby and FO, and the window heaters on the ground. Again, they would be left off until you're ready for engine start. You've got here the little loop test for the cargo smoke detection. Just press that, it lights up, and we can knock these on. This is the smoke detectors inside the cargo compartment. So there's one in the forward, one in the aft, one in the aft, and one in the bulk. And obviously this is fitted with the main cargo smoke detection as well, because it is the freighter. And finally, let's do the fire test for the engine number 2. So we'll press loop A and also loop B, which is kind of good. And of course I will get the little ding. Where are we? Where's the master caution? It's down there, and I need to, oh okay, it's cancelled itself, which is kind of good. Right, so there we go. That's pretty much it. And then real quick on the emergency lights, the APU bleed can come on now, so we can and you see, look at that, the cabin just does a little flip there while the engines while things pressurize. You'll probably see that come back down in a second. And what I can also do now is I can disconnect the external power as well. And finally, over here is all of the cockpit temperature displays. Now, according to Eric, I'm going to flick those around to about the 10 or 11 AM position, and that's a comfortable temperature for the whole cabin. And also, econ flow was quite common to use this in the freighters, because obviously freight doesn't usually give off as much heat as people, so you can quite happily use econ flow. And I believe, if I remember correctly from Eric, that cuts down the air conditioning efficiency by about 20%. So 20% less air conditioning, but obviously saves a bit of fuel, and is also a lot quieter as well. Apparently in the flight deck, it would considerably cut down the noise. One other thing as well, which is worth talking about here, is remember, of course, there's a lot of redundancy here, lots of backup dials to back up what's on the screens, and you've got CRT. So if I move that around to the middle, you see that this now goes back down to 0. And here's quite a cool thing. If I select a COND, which is the air conditioning ECAM screen, and go up here, and if I roll this around, you see it actually puts a little X in the place of the particular section of the aircraft that we're looking at the temperature for. So it's this is basically just a little backup, just basically in case this screen dies, we can go back and we can actually manually check the temperature in any one of these compartments, which is pretty cool. Just a little bit of kind of early 80s redundancy that you had here in the A300. All right, so that's pretty much everything, really. I mean, we've done everything there is to do now. We've started to align the IRSs. The overhead panel is set. Fuel pumps don't go on yet. The heating and ice protection doesn't go on yet. And all the lights when we start moving. But everything else is actually looking pretty good. Now, what we need to do is start programming the FMGS, as it's called in this aeroplane, and start the aeroplane moving towards Dublin. So let's get some things programmed in. We're going from EGCC to EIDW. That is the code for Dublin. Put that in there. And because I already have a route, by the way, this just goes in the default X-Plane flight plan folder, and I've just dumped it in there from SimBrief. And I'm not going to go into how you do all that now. It's super simple. Just get the SimBrief downloader and it will just do it all for you. And this is our route. So to Wallasey, Pennell, Lando, and then basically across the IRC to Bagzo. Just going to insert that, and now it says Align IRS, and I can clear that, and any second now you should see the IRSs come to life. You'll see the map appear any second now. The airplane knows where it is. It's got a lat and long, and you can click on this little button here, and using the up and down we could change the lat and long if this is incorrect. So we would compare this lat and long with that of the gate position on the chart. But again, I'm not going to get too kind of bogged down in all that stuff today, because it's just all going to take far too long to do, and we're going to be here for a very long time. I'm going to put a cost index in today, and our cruise level today is going to be 180, and we are going to be ER 3223. There we are. And our cruise wind today is 312 at 29, so not particularly strong winds anywhere today. And what we can do now, we can either go onto the next page and start putting in all the weights, or we can do the flight plan. Let's just do all this stuff first. We've got 16 tons of fuel in the airplane. That's more than enough to get to Dublin. The zero fuel weight today is going to be 130. It will calculate our takeoff weight, gross weight 145. On our landing weight, that's how much fuel it thinks we're going to use, although I think we will use a little bit more than that. But these will all straighten themselves out when we put more information in. And also now we just need the C of G. So what I'm going to do is come back over here to our EFB, and we have this cool little thing here called Load Manager and Load Sheet. Now, kind of up to you really how you want to play this. You can either go in there and start loading all the fuel per tank or whatever. And the same with the payload as well. You can do it by forward, aft, bulk, and all that. Now, I'm afraid I'm far too lazy for all that. I like to just go to the load sheet, highlight it. So just kind of move your mouse up to it and click on it. Type in the zero fuel weight. In our case, it's 130. And the fuel on board we said was 16. And load payload of fuel. The airplane will do a little jump while it loads. And then I can send the takeoff performance to the takeoff performance page. And you can see we've got the takeoff weight in there, which is 146. Now, can't do anything here until we've got a little bit more information in the... Oh, by the way, look, there you go. It says Nav Acur upgraded. So what that means is the IRS has now aligned, and all the map displays have come to life, which is great. So GPS primary, which is perfect. Right. Now, one thing that I didn't look at because I forgot was to check the C of G. Now that was back here on the load sheet, and it was 29.8. There we are. So 29.8, and that goes in there. Now we've pretty much got everything. The one thing I haven't done is put the alternate in. Our alternate is going to be Shannon today. So EINN. So let me pop that in there. Doesn't have a route to Shannon, but that's fine. And then there you go. That's also given us the alternate fuel as well to get off to Shannon. That's why that was blank. I'd forgotten to put the alternate in. in my rush to get there. I'm not sure we would actually need an alternate, because I think, you know, Dublin has more than one runway. I'm guessing we probably wouldn't have actually needed an alternate, but we'll throw it in there anyway. A bit of belt and braces here at DHL today. Now, let's go back here and go to the takeoff performance. And now what we can do, once we've entered the takeoff runway, we can then start getting ourselves on our way. Now, what I can do is I can type it all in, or if I want to be even lazier, and this airplane's great at saving you time like this, is I can just quickly throw in the departure runway. We're going to go off 23 left today, so that's the runway that's a little bit further away. The Eclad 1 Yankee. I'm going to insert that, and then I'm going to roll all the way down to Dublin, and we're going to throw the star in. It's going to be the Bagzo, I think 1 kilo, is that right? Let me just check. Yeah, it's going to be the Bagzo 1 kilo, and that's on the ILS to 28. So we press insert, and that is all in. And there we are, perfect. So that is all looking pretty good. Now, again, at this point, if this was one of our kind of full-blown training programs with me sitting here with an airline pilot, we would be now talking about the departure and the SID and the radials and tuning the VORs and level offs and all kinds of stuff. I'm not going to kind of get bogged down in all that stuff today, because it will just take far too long. We just want to get the airplane in the air and fly it relatively realistically. What we'll do is let's get the rest of the airplane set up, and then once we get the engine started and taxi out, we'll take a quick look at the SID and just make sure that we know what we're doing. But I do know for a fact that our initial altitude here is going to be 5,000 feet, so we can get that in. Now, here's a cool little thing with the A300 altitude selector. It goes up in hundreds initially, so when you turn it, it goes up in hundreds. If you press it in the middle there, then it goes up in thousands. Now, the weird thing is that if you press it and then say put it to 2,200, then press it again, it goes up then in multiples of plus 200, which is kind of funky. So that's just worth, you know, kind of bearing in mind that it's not going to go back to thousands automatically. My feeling is in the 320 that if it's at 2,500 and you wind it up, it then goes back to thousands, I think. Don't quote me on that, but it's just a little gotcha to be aware of. Just make sure you know what you're doing with the mouse here, because it either goes up by 100 or by 1,000, but today it's going to be 5,000. That's what we want. We also want to get the V2 speed in on the FCU on the left-hand side. We'll do that when we do the performance, but the other thing that we can do real quick is just get the initial runway heading in, and that is going to be 232. Now, you saw me do the A300's little party trick there with the heading selector. If the heading selector is miles away and off your screen, which I've just put it again now back to 174, if I want to bring it in line with the heading of the aircraft, I just push it in the middle, and you see it just automatically clicks where I want to go. So I think the runway heading, I think it's 232. But again, I'll just double check all that when we get the charts out later on. I just want to get something fairly realistic and reasonable in there for now before we get going. I'm going to put constraint in so we can see those altitude constraints on the SID and also on the other side as well. And another little A300 gotcha is it's quite normal to wind off the decision height to -5 because apparently the radio altimeter in this thing is a little bit weird, and sometimes when you get down quite low it can think you're about to land using the decision height even though you're not, and give you the minimums call, which is a little bit off-putting when you're about to land and it goes minimums and you're like, whoa, at 5 feet. So just to stop that little startle factor, a lot of the guys will wind that off to -5, so there's no danger unless you well, I don't know, unless you land on a runway with a big hole in it, then you won't get that kind of phantom call, which is kind of cool. The other thing we need to do, obviously, is set the takeoff flex. We'll talk about that in a second. But I kind of think that is pretty much it. Is there anything? I mean, obviously, there are some tests and a few things like that we could have run. There is the kind of alternate brake test. So you want to make sure the chocks are in, which they are. And there's a little alternate brake test where you kind of push on the brakes and you can kind of see the brake pressure goes up and other little bits and pieces like that. But again, these are all probably for little future videos. There's also a kind of landing gear test as well to test whether the landing gear is down, whether that system is going to work. Most of this stuff is modeled and it all works as it should. And again, in some future videos, we're going to show you all the nice little party tricks. Another thing is, as well as the brake pressure, at the moment it's in the green, which is nice. But again, if it wasn't, let me put the brakes back on actually, because I set them off to do that test. And I don't want us to roll away if somebody takes the chocks out. Also, the brake acupressure is at the moment in the green. Sometimes when you load the airplane up, it won't be because it's random. And what you're going to do is press this little thing here. And what that will do is it will then re-energize your brake pressure so your A300 won't roll away. And remember, of course, in X-Plane, the ramps are sloped in some places as well. So your plane will roll away. It will. So just be aware of that. That can happen. We've also got terrain as well, which is kind of cool. But again, I'm going to leave all this off until we actually get to that point in the setup when we want to do it. So let's get the V-speeds in now. So what I can do is I can press FMC data. It knows that we want to go from Manchester 23 left, and we've got 3,000 meters available to us. And what I can do, again, this is another super cool thing to be lazy, and I love this, is that we can press ATIS request and it will read X-Plane's weather. Now, one little gotcha with this, if you're running Active Sky XP, which I am right now, unfortunately this doesn't work because it cannot read, as it stands right now, X-Plane's weather injection, because it injects it externally and there's no way to read it. Now, the iniSimulations guys are aware of this. I'm pretty sure they're talking to Active Sky as we speak, and it may well be by the time this arrives in your hands that there's a solution for that and it will work. Simply just has to come up with a way of reading the weather from Active Sky instead of X-Plane, which apparently is not quite as simple as you would think. So they're aware of it, and it's definitely something that they're going to do. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to just type in a few more things. So we're going to do the outside air temperature, which today is 17, and the QNH is 1017. The runway's dry, the anti-ice is off, that's the takeoff weight. And now we've got the config. So the standard way that you take off in this aeroplane, unlike the A320, where usually you turn the air conditioning off, is actually to leave it on. And thrust is obviously flex. Now flex, of course, is the reduced thrust. Again, far too complicated to really kind of go into now. It's just a way of reducing the engine power to reduce wear and also reduce noise, and also saves money for the company in maintenance on the engine as well, by using as little engine power as we can. So essentially flex will look at the length of the runway, look at the weight of the aeroplane, it will look at the weather, it will calculate all those things together, and it will give you the bare minimum engine thrust that it needs to get you in the air. That's basically how it works. And you can also select different levels of flap. Eric told me that at Monarch they would generally go with 15-15, but he said on a long runway you could go with 15-0. Now, when I press compute, if we can't go with 15-0, then it will tell me. And generally, you want to go with the lowest flap setting that you can get away with. So if you can go with 15-0, go with 15-0. So it gives us 58-61 as 62, a flex of 47, nose down trim of 0.6 down, and there is a limitation, which is the second segment runway, which is basically about how quickly we can climb after we've lifted off, and lots of other boring and complicated things that somebody else can tell you about, not me. So that basically is the takeoff performance done. Now, obviously, the V-speeds, V1 is going to be our decision speed, whether we take off or not. After 158, we ain't going to stop. We're going to go. Rotate is where we pull the nose back, and V2 is our single engine climb speed. So if we lost an engine, we would pitch the nose forward to maintain V2. That is the speed needed, the minimum speed to keep the airplane in the air if we lose one engine. That's what that speed is for. So in the flight sim industry, where we hopefully will not have an engine fail, I'm really hoping that's not going to happen. We don't actually need to worry about V2, but it's a highly critical speed in the real airplane. Now, I can either type all these in or be super lazy again and send to FMS. So you can see how this airplane has lots of nice little features that save you time and hassle. And certainly I would have had to have done very little were it not for the fact that I had to type in the weather, because Active Sky has ruined the ATIS thing. So we've got the company takeoff performance 58-61, and V2 I think we said was 162. And you're going to go, okay, I'm going to type that in there. No, you can't do it. It's not allowed. What you have to do is go up here on the FCU, and you have to actually dial it in. So there we go, 132, and 162. And now if we go back down to the MCDU, we can now see 162 is being lifted off. I did not type that in. That is coming from the FCU. That is how it's displayed on this aeroplane. So that's pretty much that. One other thing that we need to do, standard thing in the A300, is we will set the green dot speed. Now again, with that kind of boring you senseless with lots of detail that isn't important right now, the green dot speed is pretty much as slow as we can fly without having the flaps out. That's the kind of flap retracted kind of minimum speed. And at the moment that is 230. That's VFTO. 230 knots. We add 20 knots to that and we pre-select it. So what we do is we now press this, wind this up. Remember, press it before you do it. So it says preset. And now this goes to 250 knots. And there we go. 230 plus 20 is 250. Now, you might be wondering where the V2 speed has gone. Where has it gone? Will it reappear? No, it won't. That will stay there. It will stay as 250 in the speed window. Final thing we've got to do is just obviously give the autopilot a mode for the takeoff. Now, we could take off, I guess, in heading or whatever we want to do. The normal profile in the A300 is to press Prof. And you will see that the FMA changes to P climb. And that's essentially like VNAV. So remember VNAV in a Boeing or climb, manage climb in an A320. This is A300 name or term for VNAV, effectively. But it does have a few gotchas, as Eric said, and we'll come back to some of those later. And then press nav, and what that means is that it will essentially then follow the nav course. So once we depart, then the flight director will essentially just follow our nav course, and we'll be on our merry way. Vertical speed is at 0, and we can leave it there. And that, my friends, is pretty much everything we've got to do. Let's set the flex. Now, that is over here on this thing called the TRP. And the TRP is a thing called the thrust rating panel, which is this thing over here, which is where we set the takeoff limit. Now, at the moment, we've got it on toga. And we haven't got a lot of fuel. We've only got, what is it, 15.8 tons of fuel. That's not a lot of fuel for an A300, even at our maximum zero fuel weight, which we are, so a full house in the back. This thing will go like a rocket. So we want that flex thing. If we take off with toga, it will scare the SH you-know-what T out of us, as Eric said, on the takeoff. We don't want that, so we're going to hit flex, and it goes to 45, and today we want a little bit more than that. We want it on 47, so keep clicking, and it goes to 47. And our takeoff EPR, if you like, so our engine power is going to be 1.452. That's going to be kind of up here somewhere on the display. Final thing we want to do is set the landing elevation. I think it's 200 feet. I think it's like 201 feet at Dublin. That's pretty much close enough for me. Brake fan, obviously, I don't need that on right now, but we might need after my heavy-footed landing. And pretty much that's it. There is a VOR here in Manchester. I could tune it up manually, so what I could do, if I want to, is click VOR on that one, and VOR on that one, and then tune the Manchester VOR. So actually I'm going to do that now, and again, I said I wasn't going to get kind of too caught up in all the SIDS and stars and tuning VOR radials and all that, because it's not necessary. We've got GPS on this thing, but just to be a good boy and a little bit conscientious, I'm going to tune in those VORs. Give me a second while I find the frequency. It's 11.355 and 11.355. Now, whoops, 11.3. Now, there is a course, the kind of outbound course on radials. I'm not going to do that. All I actually want for this is I want the DME off the Manchester, because that's when you actually make that first turn. So I'm going to be partly a good boy in that I'll tune them. But I'm not going to be a good boy and tune all the radials and all that, because, you know, that is just really for another video. We don't need all that to fly all this departure. We're going to fly it in managed mode anyway, so we're not going to get hung up about all the radials and all that. So that pretty much is everything. We've done our takeoff performance. We've programmed the McDo. We've got a route in there. Let's get that on the flight plan page. Let me just put an imaginary squawk in of 2513, and that's pretty much it. Did I close the flight deck door? Let me just check that in case we have any lunatics traveling on the courier seat today. So that's that closed. Now, on the overhead, I'm going to lock the door. So just hold down the lock. And, oh, it looks like I mixed up the smoking and the seatbelt signs. Oh, well, as long as nobody's smoking or standing. All right, let's get the external power disconnected and everything outside off. And then we will be pretty much ready to go. Well, we've actually, I don't know how long this has taken, but we seem to have rattled through it all fairly quickly. So, air stairs gone. External power gone. It won't let you switch that off, by the way, unless you unselect the button on the overhead. And also we'll get rid of the chocks as well. And of course, because in this aeroplane we've got to do the role of everyone, welcome to the flight sim world. We just want to make sure, having a quick look outside, that the chocks are in fact gone. There are no cones, and there's nothing outside the aeroplane that is going to hurt us or in fact hurt anybody else. And actually, if we have a quick look, we can see that that is the case. So it's all looking pretty good there. Right, that, my friends, is pretty much it. What we will do now is we will run the before start checklist down to the line. So cockpit preparation is complete. I'm pretty happy that we've done everything. We've done the FCU, and this is just your final check really now. P-climb and nav, we've got. Man thrust is what we also need to see. I can see one little gotcha, and again, this is why we check these things. I didn't check, actually put the altimeter in. It's 1017, and we could have very easily actually taken off with it in 1013 if we hadn't checked that. So again, that's exactly why you do these things. So they're all linked, by the way. So that one, and that one, and you want to check. It's about 250 feet here in Manchester, and that's what it says. So good little gotcha there, which actually appears again in the checklist. So signs are on. So we've got the no smoking and the seatbelt signs on. The takeoff data, that is set. We've got 58, 61, and 62, and that's also repeated up here as well, which is good. The landing elevation we set for Dublin, which is 200 feet, close enough. Altimeters, our little gotcha we did, 1017, and the brake anti-skid. And the reason you check that is because I was fiddling with it before while I was showing you that there's a little alternate brake test. And of course, if you leave that in the off or the alternate position, then your brakes won't work. So it's something that they put in the checklist to make sure, if you've been fiddling around with it, that it is actually there. And of course, we want to make sure at this moment that the brakes are set as well, because we don't have any chocks in and we don't want to roll away. So now we go down to the line. Before we do that, we're going to turn everything else on. So I'm going to turn on the remainder of the fuel pumps, as well as the propates and the windows. And I'm going to turn on the beacon. We're going to check that all the doors and the windows are closed, which they are. So that all looks good. You would just give this a little, this is the window handle. You just give that a little thump as well. And that is pretty much it. So below the line, windows and doors closed, the beacon is on, and the parking brake is set. And with that, we are ready to push back.